As a quick reminder for everyone, during the presentation, please keep your microphones on mute until you have a question. Generally, she'll stop and ask for questions, but go ahead and ask them if you need to, or always you can always type in the chat area. And if you have a webcam and you have a question, go ahead and pop your webcam up to ask your question as well, and then you can go ahead and minimize that. Hi, Dr. Pucino.
Hi, Dr. Pershino. Just go ahead and put on the headset, and as I showed you earlier, make sure that the mic at the top is green.
No, we can't hear you yet, Dr. Pucino. Looks like you maybe need to make sure the microphone at the top of the screen is green. If it's white, you need to click it to turn on your microphone. Okay.
Okay, let me go help you. 1 second.
Hey, Catherine, if you're talking to me, I can't hear you yet. Thanks for your patience, everyone. We will hopefully get started here in just a minute or two. Hi, Catherine, I cannot. Can you hear us? Can you hear me? Okay. No, I cannot hear you. Make sure that I'm still hearing everything here. Looks like okay. So you recorded your voice and you heard your voice playback, correct? Okay. Let me, yeah, see, I'm not getting that. I'm going to mute you and then unmute you and see if that helps at all. Okay, now I see the microphone icon, so try and unmute.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, yes.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Okay, it's working now. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and do Dr. Pruchino's introduction from her office.
Okay.
So Dr. Pruchino is the Director of Research, a University Professor, and Endowed Professor of Gerontology at the New Jersey Institute for Successful Aging. She earned her PhD in Human Development and Family Studies at Penn State University, MA from Oakland University, and BA from Michigan State University. She's currently the Editor-in-Chief of the Gerontologist. She has served on the editorial boards of the International Journal of Aging and Development and Journal of Gerontology Psychological Sciences. Dr. Pruchino has been the principal investigator on NIH-funded grants totaling close to $7 million, as well as foundation grants of more than $3 million. She has published more than 70 peer-reviewed articles and 10 book chapters. And without further ado, here is Dr. Pruchino.
Catherine? Okay, can you hear me?
Sure can.
All is good? Excellent, wonderful. Sorry for the technological difficulties here. Okay, so the title of my talk this afternoon is Successful Aging, How Neighborhoods Can Help Older People and Their Families Thrive. This lecture is based on research that I've been doing for the past 3 or 4 years, and I have presented to this group before, so some of what I talk about today will be a little bit of repetition, but there's also going to be some new information. So my goal this afternoon is threefold. First, I'm going to tell you about successful aging and what I mean by successful aging. Secondly, I'm going to show you some compelling evidence suggesting that across the lifespan, at all ages, where people live, most saliently their neighborhoods, make a difference for their physical health, their mental health, and the way they age. And third, I'm going to talk about some recent analyses that I've done focused on the effects that neighborhoods have on successful aging. Now, am I controlling the slides, or is somebody else controlling the slides?
You can control them with the little arrows at the bottom of the screen.
I can go forward?
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay. So the dictionary defines, and the thesaurus is usually the first place we go for understanding a definition. And as you can see, the dictionary defines success as having a favorable outcome or obtaining something desired or intended. The thesaurus talks about, defines successful as accomplished, flourishing, prosperous, and thriving. So that gives us some clue as to what we mean by success. When I started reading the successful aging literature, I very quickly found that there's little agreement regarding the definitions that people have of successful aging and how to measure it. Not surprisingly, it's not clear we don't understand what predicts successful aging and how these predictors are distinct from successful aging itself. One of the most basic questions about successful aging is it something that's objective? Can we see it? Can we touch it? Can we feel it from the outside? Or is it something that's subjective, a state of mind? As I read the successful aging literature, I was struck by the consistent confounding of success and age. In their 2006 literature review, Depp and Jest found that the most consistent predictor of successful aging was age, and that younger people were more successful than older people. So we've got some real problems understanding what this concept of successful aging is. A critical question among people studying successful aging is, can people age successfully if they have a chronic condition? I think this question really is at the heart of what we struggle with when we seek to understand successful aging. So let's take a look at some examples. FDR, struck by polio at age 39. This is one of two pictures depicting him in a wheelchair. The 32nd President of the United States served for 12 years until he died in 1945 at age 63. FDR spearheaded the New Deal and led the U.S. during World War II. He suffered from high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, coronary artery disease, causing angina pectoris, and congestive heart failure. A majority of polls rank Roosevelt as the second or third greatest president. Did he age successfully? Let's take a look at Stephen Hawking, the English theoretical physicist and cosmologist, diagnosed with ALS at age 21. His brief history of time brought black holes in theoretical physics to a level that lay people could understand them. Since 2009, he's been unable to drive his wheelchair independently, and he's on a ventilator. He's now 71. FDR suffered, and Stephen Hawking suffers from chronic conditions. Could they age successfully? What about John Nash? His life story was depicted in the movie A Beautiful Mind. Nash was a brilliant mathematician who was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia at age 31. In 1994, when he was 66, he received the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Science. In 2010, when he was 82, he was awarded the Double Helix Medal. Did he age successfully? Coming back to gerontology, in 1987, Rowan Kahn defined successful aging. People who age successfully experienced few or no age-related declines. This definition implies that it's possible to reach advanced age relatively free of age-associated disease. Their thinking about successful aging was important because in the late 1980s, aging was synonymous with decline. But they got scientists thinking about the possibilities of aging successfully. According to their definition, however, the number of people experiencing successful aging was very small. In 1998, Rowan Kahn fleshed out their ideas about successful aging in their book. They defined it as 1, having the ability to maintain low levels of disease and disease-related disability, 2, maintaining high levels of mental and physical health, and 3, being actively engaged with life. These new criteria set the bar for successful aging even higher. But 46% of the general population and 88% of people aged 65 and over have one chronic disease. So is successful aging even possible, one might ask, according to Rowan Kahn's definition? Although Rowe and Kahn revolutionized the study of aging, their definition of successful aging was problematic for several reasons. First, it suggested that only a minority of people could possibly age successfully. Secondly, it was based on a medical model. And third, younger age is the best predictor of success. So we find ourselves wondering, are we really talking about aging? Other scientists have tried to define successful aging. Schmidt in 1994 focused on minimal interruption of usual function, and Baltus and Carstensen focused on doing the best with which one has. These definitions shift the focus from the minority to the majority of people and stretch the extent to which someone can be considered a successful ager in light of chronic disease and functional disability. After reading the literature, my colleagues and I proposed the following, proposed that successful aging should have these characteristics. First, that it should be measurable in both objective and subjective terms. Second, that it should have broad social consensus regarding desirability. And third, that there should be variability within the population. I caution that the people that I'm going to tell you about that we've been studying are age 50 to 74. And so that influenced the way we thought about the objective criteria. I think if we were studying an older population, we might think about these criteria in a different way. But for this population, we defined objective successful aging according to the objective criteria as avoiding chronic conditions, maintaining functional abilities, and experiencing minimal pain. The subjective criteria are the individual perceptions that people have about aging well, aging successfully, and rating their life as overall being positive. We developed and tested a two-factor model of successful aging and addressed the question, are there people who are successful according to one but not the other definition? Before I go on, I want to tell you a little bit about the people that we studied. In 2004, I was recruited to the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey by a dean who wanted to create a research infrastructure to complement a vibrant center on aging that was primarily focused on training osteopathic physicians. I developed the idea that creating a unique database that we named Orange Bowl would be an effective way to teach us more about aging. I hope that the Orange Bowl would serve as a resource for faculty and students, as well as a vehicle for promoting collaborative research with scholars outside the university. To ensure scientific merit and buy-in from our key stakeholders, who are NIH funders, university researchers, we held a planning conference to which we invited 30 leading scholars. We asked people to help us decide whom to study, how to identify the sample, and what measures to use. The consensus was to focus on people aged 50 to 74 living in New Jersey who were able to participate in a 1-hour English language phone interview. People were identified using random digit dialing procedures. To do this, the university developed a CADI facility, which is computer-assisted telephone interviewing. We purchased lists of random phone numbers, and we sampled geographically proportional to the New Jersey population. The original goal was to include 10,000 people in this database. We developed a 60-minute interview that assessed a wide range of constructs. Guiding decisions about what to include were thoughts from the consensus conference, as well as estimates about characteristics that the constituency who are likely to use Orange Bowl might want to focus on. As you can see, we measured a wide variety of demographic characteristics, physical health, mental health, and health behaviors. There was a lot of work involved in identifying and completing the interviews. This slide shows you some of the details. More than 1 million phone calls were made between 2006 and 2008. The Orange Bowl response rates were higher than other studies like it. Our cooperation rate was consistent with other large studies, which means that the findings from this study are probably generalizable to the population. The final sample that we developed was somewhat smaller than we had hoped because of issues going on at the university, but it was representative of the state of New Jersey. Here you can see some of the characteristics of our sample, where you can see that the mean is about 61 years old, about 64% were women. The majority were married, but a sizable number were widowed and divorced. About 9% had never been married. The sample was better educated than the population, but that's very consistent with who participates in research. The sample was 84% white and about 12% African American. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the way we measured successful aging. So we asked Orange Bowl respondents whether a doctor had diagnosed them with each of these chronic health conditions. The numbers on the slide represent the proportion of the sample with each diagnosis. So about 40% had been diagnosed by a physician with arthritis, about 16% had been diagnosed with diabetes, and so on and so forth. Functional abilities. We measured maintenance of functional abilities by asking people, how difficult is it for you to walk a quarter of a mile, walk up 10 steps without resting, stand for 2 hours, and stoop and then get up. And you can see here that Orange Bowl respondents reported the extent of difficulty with these activities. The percent that you see are the percent of people who had any difficulty with each of these functional abilities. And pain was measured by it was self-reported using these 3 questions that are pretty typical of the way pain is assessed in other studies. So subjective success was measured using 3 items. Each of the items asked people to rank themselves on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 means not successful at all, 10 means completely successful. And people would rank themselves anywhere between 0 and 10. So we asked them how successful they felt they had been at aging, how well they were aging, and then we asked them a question about a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is the worst possible life and 10 is the best possible life. How do you rate your life these days? So these are our subjective indicators of success. So don't be frightened of this spaghetti drawing, but what we found is that our measures of objective and subjective success behaved exactly as we thought they would. The objective indicators of success were highly related to one another, so functional abilities, pain, and diseases were highly related to each other. While there is a moderately high correlation between objective and subjective success, our data indicate that a person can be successful according to one but not the other definition. Now, we also found that although age was related to measures of subjective success, it was not related to measures of subjective success. And that was what we were really hoping. We were really trying, I was very troubled by an idea that successful aging could best be predicted by age. Objective success, yes, given the way we operationalized it, but subjective success, whether you feel you're a success, should not, our hypothesis was that subjective success should not be associated with age, and in fact, that's what we found. The demographics of our country, the growing numbers of baby boomers, make successful aging a public policy imperative. We can't afford to have people not age successfully. Given that we know that genetics have little play in the aging process after age 65, the question becomes, what needs to happen so that more people will age successfully? The answer I've been focusing on in my research is place, more specifically the neighborhoods in which we live. Before we talk specifically about neighborhoods, I want to show you some of the many ways that where matters. Let's start with baseball, one of my favorites. These data show that baseball teams scored more runs at home than away during the 2011 regular season. So where matters in baseball? But where matters also in terms of longevity. Butner's research work that made its way to the Oprah show found that there are areas in the world where there are many more centenarians than expected. Where matters in terms of life expectancy, which is lowest in the South and highest in Hawaii. Let's take a look at obesity, a key predictor of many of the major chronic diseases. The United States is the most obese country. It became more obese over the past 20 years. Notice that in 1990, no states had obesity rates more than 10%. By 2000, the pattern had changed dramatically. In 10 years, the pattern had changed dramatically. Many states had obesity rates between 15 and 19%, and several states had obesity rates between 20 and 24%. And by 2010, obesity rates in most states were at least 25%, with several states approaching 30% or more. By 2011, only one state, Colorado, had obesity rates under 20%. Rates of obesity among young people are also related to place. As you can see, youth in Minnesota, Utah, and Oregon have relatively low rates of obesity, while those in Mississippi have much higher rates of obesity. And here's ground zero, Holmes County, Mississippi, where rates of obesity amongst both adults and preschoolers were the highest in the United States. Where matters. Across a wide variety of health outcomes, where matters. Here you can see that stroke death rates in the Boston area are much lower than those in northwestern part of Massachusetts. Where matters when we look at AIDS rates, which are highest in the District of Columbia and much lower in Georgia. And where matters for infant mortality rates. Not only does where matter for infant mortality rates, but this slide shows how where has mattered consistently over time. Notice that rates of infant mortality for Iowa in the green have been dramatically lower than those for Tennessee in the purple across the 10-year period. Similarly, where matters when we look at data regarding low birth rate and asthma rates. Notice that rates in Wayne County, Michigan, the Detroit area, are much higher than those characterizing the rest of the state. Where matters when we look at health behaviors as well. Here you can see that smoking rates in places like Mississippi, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, as well as Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky, are much higher than those in Utah and California. Where matters when we look at data regarding eating patterns. Americans spent $165 billion on fast food in 2010, but patterns of consumption varied widely by place. Here we see the 10 states in which the highest percent of dining out budgets is spent in fast food restaurants. You'll see Mississippi, the highest, 62%. Where also matters for mental health, with some states having very low rates of depression, as you see here on the left, while others have much higher rates of depression. Although the pattern regarding suicide is somewhat different from that for depression, you can see that suicide rates also vary as a function of where people live. Up until now, I've shown you descriptive data about how characteristics of people may vary as a function of where they live. To truly appreciate the ways in which place matters, we need to be able to change something about place and see if changes to people follow. Move to Opportunity provides one of the few such studies. Between 1994 and 1998, HUD sponsored a demonstration project that sought to understand the effects of residential location on employment income, education, and well-being. Eligibility criteria included families with children under age 18 and people living in selected public housing developments in Baltimore, Boston, and Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York, where poverty rates were greater than 40%. The program involved a randomized lottery to receive rent-subsidized vouchers. People were randomly assigned to one of three conditions. The first group included people who were offered a low-poverty voucher entitling them to standard rent-subsidized housing. It required, however, that the voucher be used in a census tract with poverty rates less than 10%. People in this group received short-term counseling to help with their housing search and were asked to make a one-year commitment to living in their new neighborhood. The second group received traditional vouchers with no restrictions on where they could live, and they were provided with no counseling. And the third the control group, received no assistance. Before I tell you about the findings of this study, a couple of caveats. First, only half the women selected to move actually moved. Secondly, many who did move moved again after a year. And finally, people in the control group often moved on their own. So it's kind of a messy design. "15 years after the social experiment, intent to treat results found, first, that compared with women in the control group, women in the low poverty voucher group were less likely to be obese and they were less likely to have diabetes. Second, there were no differences between the control group and the traditional voucher group. These findings suggest that clinical or public health interventions that ameliorate the effects of neighborhood environments could generate substantial health benefits. Move to Opportunity provides very powerful support for the importance of where. So I hope I've convinced you that where does matter. Now the question is why? Why does place matter? And I want to turn my attention now to thinking about why this might be. Bronfenbrenner, with his ecological theory, was one of the first to suggest that to understand the child, one had to understand what was happening around him. This involved 5 interconnected systems that you see here, the most central to my lecture this morning being the microsystem. According to Bronfenbrenner, the microsystem includes family, school, peers, religious affiliation, workplace, and the neighborhood. Interestingly, Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, developed in the late 1970s, was based on analyses and integration of findings conducting over many decades by researchers from diverse disciplines, beginning with a study carried out in Berlin in 1870 on the effects of the neighborhood on concept development among children. Bronfenbrenner's model suggested that throughout the life course, human development takes place through processes of reciprocal interaction between human organisms and their immediate environment. Development was a process influenced by the person, the environment, and the interaction between the person and the environment. Based on Bronfenbrenner's framework, we can develop hypotheses about why place matters. For example, maybe there's something about the built environment that makes people healthier. Perhaps people with access to stores selling vitamins and fresh fruit are less likely to develop diabetes than those who do not have this access. Or maybe people who live near parks are healthier because they walk more than people who do not live near parks. Maybe people who live near large hospitals are healthier because they have better access to emergency care. Maybe kids who have a safe neighborhood, who live in a safe neighborhood, have lower rates of obesity because they play outside more often than kids who live in a dangerous neighborhood. Maybe asthma rates among children are higher in neighborhoods where pollution from manufacturing plants prevails, and even higher in neighborhoods where people frequently smoke cigarettes and rates of air pollution are high. And maybe kids who live in neighborhoods dominated by fast food restaurants are more obese than children who do not live near fast food restaurants. As you can see, the mechanisms connecting neighborhoods and health are plentiful. Before I go further, I want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that challenge neighborhood researchers. First is the issue of endogeneity. Aside from move to opportunity, the move to opportunity experiment, people do not randomly move to neighborhoods. Rather, they move to neighborhoods in which people like them live. As such, there's a built-in confound or nesting of people in neighborhoods. Second is the issue of separating contextual and compositional effects. Contextual effects are those associated with the built environment, while compositional effects are those associated with the people who live in geographic spaces. These two often are confounded, as evident in McIntyre's observation that people make places and places make people, but it makes for very messy research. The third issue is the tendency to rely on routinely available aggregate measures, such as the percent of poverty, to reflect what a neighborhood is. Although there has been movement afoot to expand how neighborhoods are represented, the overwhelming majority of published research studies have focused on poverty levels. The fourth issue is whether to use objective or subjective indicators of neighborhoods, as there is evidence that they are not highly correlated with one another, and that objective and subjective definitions of neighborhoods have different associations with health. And finally is the issue of neighborhood boundaries. The overwhelming majority of studies, including those I've been involved with, have relied on census tracts to define the space of a neighborhood. Yet most people don't know the boundaries of their census tracts. So the question is, what physical boundaries should be used to represent neighborhoods? Orange Bowl is a rich database developed using state-of-the-art sampling procedures that represents people aged 50 to 74 in New Jersey. My challenge was to figure out what would make it a great, innovative database that the NIH would be interested in. Clearly, there were bigger databases, national databases, and long-term longitudinal databases that Orange Bowl could not compete with. Then I thought about some of the research that I had done earlier in my career as I studied the effects of environments on nursing home residents. I decided that if I could merge the Orange Bowl data with information about the environments in which these people lived, I would have something that was truly unique. My staff and I started by geocoding the addresses from our participants, and then we matched the location of their home to data from the 2000 census. We now had volumes of data about the socioeconomic status of neighborhoods, rates of disability in the population, and some information about the connectivity of the streets in which people lived. Next, we connected our data with data about crime from the New Jersey Uniform Crime Report. This gave us information about minor crimes and misdemeanors as well as violent crimes. The more I read about neighborhood effects, the more I gained interest in knowing whether the neighborhoods in which people lived provided them with access to grocery stores, fast food restaurants, and supermarkets. This proved to be a tough nut to crack until one of my research assistants discovered that in New Jersey, a license to sell milk was the common denominator for these places. We purchased a list of all establishments in New Jersey that had a license to sell milk from the New Jersey Department of Agriculture's Division of Marketing and Development, and we coded thousands of places. Finally, because there was good evidence in the literature that the number of bars and liquor establishments spoke volumes about a neighborhood, we secured this information from New Jersey's Department of Law and Public Safety's Division of Alcohol Beverage Control. Now I'm going to tell you about some of the research my colleagues and I have been doing. Reading the literature, I found that when people talked about neighborhoods, what they were really talking about were various indicators of socioeconomic status, most typically poverty. My colleagues and I developed a conceptual framework that we hoped would provide a more textured and nuanced understanding of neighborhoods. Our model included contextual characteristics, that is, the built and non-built aspects of geographic space, and the compositional characteristics, that is, features of the people living in the place. We hypothesized that some of the contextual characteristics would have negative relationships with health, for example, storefront density, fast food restaurants, and violent crime, while other contextual characteristics would have positive relationships with health, for example, supermarkets and availability of physicians. Similarly, we hypothesized that some compositional features would have negative relationships with health, for example, social vulnerability, indicators of social vulnerability, while other compositional characteristics would have positive relationships with health, for example, the wealth of the neighborhood and residential stability. We built a measurement model that accounted for the relationships between our hypothesized constructs and their indicators. We examined many indicators before we arrived at this representation of neighborhoods. The goal of our analyses was to represent as many distinct characteristics of neighborhoods as possible, given the data available to us. As you can see, we were able to characterize neighborhoods as a function of availability of physicians, fast food restaurants, violence, social vulnerability, wealth, residential stability, and storefront density. We built a robust model of the texture of neighborhoods. And then we examined the relationship between these neighborhood characteristics and population disability of people aged 65 to 69. Here you can see that neighborhood characteristics have very different associations with disability. There was, for example, no significant relationship between disability and fast food restaurants. Relationships between disability and supermarkets and availability of physicians were negative and small, but significant. More substantial negative associations existed between disability and residential stability, as well as wealth, while substantial positive associations were found between disability and violence, storefronts, and social vulnerability. These analyses begin to shed light on why neighborhoods matter, as they reach beyond defining neighborhoods as a function of poverty to tell us what it is about neighborhoods that is related to disability. While our analyses focus on disability levels, I suspect we would have seen very different patterns of relationship between neighborhood characteristics and other indicators of health, for example, depression. The analyses that I just told you about were at the ecological level. Next, we struggled to disentangle individual and neighborhood effects as we examine the relationships between social vulnerability and functional limitations of our Orange Bowl sample. You'll recall my earlier comments about endogeneity and the intrinsic linking of people in neighborhoods. Here we sought to separate out individual and neighborhood effects. There are known associations between functional limitations and socioeconomic status. Individual income and education are related to functional limitations, with less educated people and those with lower incomes having more functional limitations. There are also known associations between functional limitations and neighborhood socioeconomic status, as people who live in socially vulnerable neighborhoods have more functional limitations than those who do not. The problem is that individual socioeconomic status and neighborhood socioeconomic status are confounded with one another because people do not move randomly to neighborhoods. In order to address the question, do people living in socially vulnerable communities have higher levels of functional limitations because they have fewer socioeconomic resources or because there is something inherently unhealthy about the communities themselves? We need to separate out the individual socioeconomic effects from the neighborhood socioeconomic effects. Using multi-level structural equation modeling, our two-tiered analysis found that social vulnerability of neighborhood has a significant relationship with functional limitations, controlling for the associations that age, gender, race, education, and income have with functional limitations. So separating out individual and neighborhood effects, we find that individual characteristics have an effect on on functional limitations, but that neighborhood has a distinct, separate effect on the functional limitations of individuals. We did a similar analysis focusing on neighborhood food environment and obesity. Food sources included supermarkets, storefronts that were bars, pubs, and convenience stores and grocery stores, and fast food restaurants. And we found that storefronts and the presence of fast food restaurants, but not the presence of supermarkets, predicted obesity, even after controlling for individual level predictors of obesity, income, education, race, gender, and age. Neighborhood matters. Next, we wondered about whether depressive symptoms were better explained by objective indicators of violence in a neighborhood or the perceptions that people have of neighborhood safety. We found that both objective indicators of neighborhood violent crime and individual perceptions of neighborhood safety have significant effects on depressive symptoms. Next, I'd like to show you how adding a geographer to our team enriched our approach to thinking about the importance of place. The issues are, to what extent is there evidence of clustering of depressive symptoms among Orange Bowl participants? And do we see similar relationships between neighborhood characteristics and depressive symptoms in all parts of New Jersey? Our analyses focused on individual depressive symptoms, measured using the 10-item CESD, and 3 neighborhood characteristics: percent poverty, residential stability, and crime. The orange dots on this map show where people with high levels of depressive symptoms live. The gray dots show where people with low levels of depressive symptoms live. What is striking here is the clustering of people with high levels of depressive symptoms. The global Moran statistic told us that there was an overall pattern of positive spatial clustering of depressive symptoms by census tract. There are areas in New Jersey where the mean depressive symptoms of Orange Bowl participants at the tract level are similar to one another. Here you can see a graph of the different R-squares across the state. The degree to which poverty, residential stability, and crime explain depressive symptoms varies from place to place across New Jersey. These variables account for more variation in depressive symptoms in a swath of the census tracts stretching from the northeast to the southwest region of the state than in other areas. Here, the independent variables explain between 5 and 18% of the variation in average depressive symptoms. We found that, that poverty was positively associated with depressive symptoms everywhere. Residential stability had a very different relationship. In North Jersey, residential stability had a significant negative association with depressive symptoms. So areas with higher levels of residential stability, where people had lived in the neighborhood for a longer period of time, had lower levels of depressive symptoms. In South Jersey, the story was different. There, residential stability was positively associated with depressive symptoms, so that greater residential stability was associated with more depressive symptoms. And finally, the relationship for crime showed that in 60% of the census tracts, crime was positively associated with depressive symptoms. But in other areas of the state, the relationship between crime and depressive symptoms was not significant. So I hope I've given you a little idea of the work that my colleagues and I have been doing in terms of the next steps. We are very fortunate to have a grant pending from the National Institute on Aging that they keep telling me is going to get funded. You know, every day I keep hearing tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. But this project will enable us to look at the effects of Hurricane Sandy on the functional limitation trajectories of older people. What's unique about Orange Bowl, and of course we had no idea back in 2006 when we were developing this panel, is that we have pre-disaster, pre-hurricane information at 2 points in time before the hurricane, and so we're in a very strong position to understand the effects that Hurricane Sandy as a stressful event has on the functional limitations of older people. And just this fall, we were fortunate to secure funding from the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response to look at the effects of social capital and resilience of older people exposed to Hurricane Sandy. What we're doing here is looking at the ways in which neighborhoods either helped or hurt older people as they struggle to recover from Hurricane Sandy. So, in conclusion, I hope that I've convinced you that where does matter in terms of physical health, in terms of mental health, and in terms of health behaviors. In terms of why, the search for mechanisms has just begun, and I will certainly keep you posted on our future analyses. Okay. Do you want to open up for questions?
Rachel, this is Elise. I see you have a couple of questions in the chat.
I got to look at the chat. Okay. I wonder if we have any data on movement on neighborhoods. Migration of neighborhoods, of the subjects. Yes, excellent question. Okay, so we, oh no, did a movement in neighborhood. We have not yet looked at that. We have the potential because we're tracking these people. So that's a stay tuned. I'm hoping we'll be able to address this issue. The people that we have been studying, the overwhelming 95% of them were in the same place for at least 3 to 4 years, and the same with the neighborhood. Our picture of the neighborhood is static. It is static to the census data that we've used is 2000, and we used that because the data that we collected was 2006 to 2008, so we wanted to get the picture before. We certainly can update with the 2010 census data. And in terms of our data on the crime and the other indicators were all based on, I want to say sort of mid-2000. So yeah, it was very difficult to get that data. I would love to be able to look at change in neighborhood. What you're really asking is the the effects of change in neighborhood and change in people. Very sophisticated questions that are very, very difficult to address, but we're certainly going to try. Were they trapped in a bad neighborhood? Yeah, I don't know. Since I was started in 2000 before the economic wonder, also what affected business? Yes, and I don't know. Donna, you're asking great questions, and I don't know. Looking at the extent of extended families. No, we're not looking at extended families. Yeah. So yeah, much of studying neighborhoods is a moving target because businesses go in and out of places, go in and out of business. The composition of neighborhood changes not as quickly, but we all know we can think about neighborhoods that maybe over a 10-year period of time, some neighborhoods are very stable. They look very you go back 10 years later and it's just different faces but similar kinds of people. Other neighborhoods change in very, very different ways. So that's a really, really important issue. And again, the data that I presented to you today is really focused on its static picture of a neighborhood. But that was hard enough to do. Are you looking at the, okay, family. Any other questions? Everybody's quiet.
I see multiple people are typing.
Are they not allowed to talk to me, or can we talk?
Yeah, the microphones are open, so if they want to go ahead and use their microphones, you are welcome.
Why don't you guys talk to me? It's way better than my having to read.
There are some people who don't have.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Rachel, can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
I can.
Hi, it's Lisa.
Yes.
I just typed. I was curious because your sample ages were 50 to 74. Maybe they are still working or in encore careers or something. I'm wondering if the data you picked up assesses actual workplace places or density of opportunities to work and how that might affect their identity and successful aging?
Yeah, we did not look at that. We do know that some of our people were still working, but we focus on the neighborhoods in which they live. And you certainly can imagine that workplace neighborhood could have an effect, a very different effect, but we didn't go there. I'm wondering if change could be included in the interviews, especially if they learn behavior from they grew up. And yeah, certainly. Again, you're asking excellent questions, and I think when you start to sort of scratch the surface of this neighborhood research, it's truly fascinating and filled with all sorts of very difficult issues. Any other questions?
Rachel, this is Elise. While we have a couple of people typing here, I would just like to say that having done some recent work with the area health education centers on the issue of population health, so much of this is really tied to that broader concept of population health, and I dare say it's going to have us looking at things in a lot more depth than we're looking at them now. Right now we're looking at them sort of at the macro level, and I think your work certainly lead us to looking at things more on a micro level where we may be able to make an impact.
So there's a question about, did you run the data with race or education as covariates? Yes, race and education were covariates in all the analyses that we did. How will you collect data for the Hurricane Sandy study? Yeah, thank you. So the Hurricane Sandy data, what we're doing is we've sent out a questionnaire to all of the Orange Bowl participants. We sent that out. We actually were able to send that out in mid-July. The initial questionnaire was sent back. And then when funding came in, we sort of did that on the fly. And then when funding was established in the fall, we sent out a second questionnaire. So at this point, we've gotten back, I want to say close to 3,000 questionnaires. And we are tracking people. The people that we haven't heard from, we will call, and we will sort of track them down. We have contact information. So some of these people may have been displaced by the hurricane, but hopefully they gave us the name and phone number of somebody who will always know where they are. So our mission as part of this Hurricane Sandy project is to track everybody down, with the thought that when the NIA project begins, we know the disposition of all the 5688 people that are part of Orange Bowl. So this is no small feat, as you can imagine, sort of tracking all these people, and many of them have died. Again, remember that the baseline data was collected in 2006 to 2008. So if you're 50 to 74, then the older part of the sample is going to start to die. But what's really interesting about the Orange Bowl panel is that it becomes much more valuable as time passes, and we're able, because we have such rich information about the characteristics of the people and of the neighborhood, back in 2006, using that as a predictor of mortality, morbidity. You can imagine that the data panel gets even more and more rich as time goes by. Any other questions, thoughts? Well, thank you. Oh, we got another one. How are we going to do? Nope. Okay.
Dr. Prishna, this is Elise. I'd like to thank you very much for delivering this talk to our new cohort of Faculty Development Collaborative Scholars. It's such a great way to kick off our whole series, and it certainly is interesting, so we really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you. All right.
Yeah, please stay tuned. I'm going to go ahead and put up a session evaluation. If you will please fill that out on your way out, we'd appreciate it.